Good morning, America. Welcome back after a felt like a long weekend to me. And it's been kind of a quiet weekend, which is interesting. But there's some big news, and the IRS came out with a huge list today talking about the ERC, which has been hanging in the background. Every now and then I get questions about it, but there are plenty of businesses who have applied for it that are still waiting for these funds. And so it talks about what to expect, and they encourage people to go through and do their own review. But again, this just makes things easier on the IRS, but there will be penalties for people filing fraudulent claims, especially if you've already received money. So the IRS is actively preparing to audit these. So a lot of information about the ERC that came out over the weekend, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So stay with us, and we'll be back shortly. Welcome back, everybody, and thank you for watching Taxes Made Easy, either live or on rebroadcast. So there's wasn't a lot of news over the weekend, but there's some interesting things, and some of this will make your head spin if you look at it and you listen to one article and then you go somewhere else. It's like up is down, down is right, so it can be very confusing. But this first article is more of kind of like a heads up. And again, in general, and I tell my kids, a general principle: if someone's marketing or pushing something and selling this as free news, it's usually not so free, and there's usually a reason for it. So this article is from CNBC. So short Andrew Left of the Citron, is his company, is charged with fraud by prosecutors in the SEC. Why? So this guy's been appearing on different TV shows as a analyst. He's been putting out newspapers, so he's gotten famous enough that he appears regular on TV, and he wants to show up and be recognized as an expert, and in many ways he has. So he's gotten enough notoriety and fame, and unfortunately he has been using that fame allegedly for good. So they accuse him of being involved in a $20 million multi-year scheme to defraud followers. So the people listening and watching to him is who he's been defrauding them, ironically. So relates to 23 companies, at least 26 separate occasions where they believe they have a case that he defrauded the people that have been watching his show, paying attention to his news releases. He even bragged to colleagues that some of these statements were especially effective in inducing retail investors to trade based on his recommendations. He said it was like taking candy from a baby. So, they always joke around that evil villains always have to share their plot, and they have to talk about it. In the movie Incredibles, which a great movie. They even joke around about the villain being caught monologuing, talking about his plan. He has to share it. Apparently, this guy had to share his plan, and pretty egregiously at that. So, the criminal conduct really is he allegedly traded on ways contrary to his public stances. So he came out, made a public stance, said, hey, this is where you should go, this is what I'm recommending, da da da. And then he did the opposite, because he would give out bad information, and he would disseminate short reports, post the information on Twitter, but with other people, he enabled the hedge funds to trade in the targeted securities before the reports were disseminated. So this isn't exactly insider information, except that he was the one creating the information and trying to manipulate the markets to move a certain direction, and they were trading beforehand to take advantage of the fact that he was famous enough and not enough people watched him. So if you're not talking to a professional that is really looking at the entire market and not following one expert, you should be using a financial planner. You should be using someone that understands the market, understands the underlying themes of the market, and is helping you plan long term, not let's make short term trades for short term gain. That's where people can manipulate you the most. And again, here's someone that's famous, or what is now infamous, and he's going down on a 19-count criminal indictment. So again, hasn't been convicted yet. And again, it's just kind of ironic here that we have a news personality, someone that's has his own investment company, gets on these TV shows, and he's ripping his viewers off. So kind of ironic, kind of scary, but again, don't just. You gotta pay attention and understand the economics of this to actually make sure that your investments are safe. So there's this one is interesting, off the topic, but from the Motley Fool, which has come out before, talking about retirement income. So states that don't tax retirement income, but be aware there's plenty of other taxes out there. But if you're retiring, so it might be very helpful. So for example, Texas has high property taxes, so does Nevada. But they can give retirees, and this is just from state taxes. So federal rules still apply no matter where you go. So talks about the different states that don't have any income tax: Alaska, Florida, Nevada, New Hampshire, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Washington, Wyoming. And then there's states that exempt retirement income if any source of retirement: Illinois, Iowa, Mississippi, Pennsylvania. Before you move to one of these states, though, you might want to think about it, but look at the entire package. What is their sales taxes? What are their property taxes? Does it make sense? And it might. It might make sense to retire and move to somewhere less expensive, that has lower taxes overall. And there's plenty of states that have a lower tax package overall, but you've got to look at everything, not just state income tax. States where you have to pay Social Security taxes. So on the flip side, Colorado, Connecticut, Minnesota, Montana, New Mexico, Rhode Island, Utah, Vermont, and West Virginia. So again, check with the CPA, go over the rules regarding Social Security taxes, and they can change. And as your income goes up federally, you have to pay. So a lot of people think that they're on Social Security, that they don't have to pay taxes. That's only if you're making less than $32,000 a year. So that's really, if you're married filing jointly and you're living on less than $3,000 a month, they're not going to tax you. That's not very much. That's not very much to live on. So if you have other sources of income that are not taxed or something, you might be able to get by, but most people are living in pretty harsh poverty at this level. Above $32,000 to $44,000, 50% is taxed, and above $44,000 up to 85% of it is taxed. So again, we have these tiers here. So again, hopefully you live in more than $4,000 a month, then most people should be in this category. Again, but it doesn't help to shoot yourself in the foot to avoid taxes. This is something that I definitely recommend. And then they have this, bonus if you want to look into it. They have this is where the sell part comes in. But when you're trying to plan for retirement, and if you're thinking of moving and retiring somewhere, sit down with a tax advisor or with a CPA, discuss the different taxes, not just the sales tax. And sometimes the property taxes can vary by county and vary greatly. So take an overall look at what is best for you and in your retirement planning, which is good, can be very helpful. Be mindful that, of course, things can change. So this next article is part of what I was initially talking about. We've got some great positive news, and then we have some people putting the brakes on things to say, hey, hold the phone here. U.S. economic growth, and this is from the Associated Press, and there's plenty of mainstream articles coming out with this and saying, look, this last quarter we had a healthy 2.8% growth in the GDP. So again, they talk about a strong 2.8% growth despite pressure from high interest rates, etc. Um, so in the January through March, it was pretty weak at 1.4%, and then here in the second quarter, 2.8% is what they're looking at. So that's good news overall that it's increasing. It was, fourth quarter 3.4, but again, the elephant in the room really is inflation. So even though it's inflation is still higher than their 2% target. Last gauge it was at 2.6%. So if we say, hey, we grew at 2.8%, that doesn't include inflation. And everybody knows it's not 2.6%. It's much higher than that because so much is excluded from how the official numbers of the government looking at inflation. While yes, that is down from 3.7%, it still has quite a ways to go when you're looking at real inflation. Which is why we get to our next article here. This one is from Investment News. It is about Morgan Stanley saying the economy tied stocks to weaken. So the stocks that are tied to economic performances are weakening. So how come the economy can grow on one hand and then it can decrease based on another measure? So why isn't the stock market rallying and celebrating this? So again, U.S. corporate earnings are dimmer, and that's likely to hurt stocks that are tied to the economy. So again, they're worried about the impact of falling inflation on pricing power. So again, it's just like, isn't falling inflation good? It is in many ways, and this is what we want overall. But again, the problem is the main gauge has gone down. So again, these are cyclical sectors is what they're looking at, and they've actually gotten weaker. But again, this is the cycle of the year where it does go down, so it's expected to get weaker, and it gets a little convoluted here. And they're saying the rally in U.S. stocks has faltered, and they're concerned that this will prompt the concerns that a slowing economy will prompt the Fed rate to cut interest rates faster and deeper than expected. So the market is acting on what they think the Fed might do on interest rates, and they're afraid that if they cut them too much, it's going to hurt. We do need decent interest rates, but again, they're concerned more about inflation rather than focusing on growth. So again, everybody's been waiting for the Fed to cut. There's been so much pressure for the Fed to cut rates, but I think it's holding back growth. There have been plenty of downgrades that have outnumbered upgrades. So we've had a few earnings that have really performed very high, but when you look at the broader market, a lot of individual companies just aren't doing as well. And so again, while we have growth in Nvidia and Tesla and a few very large companies, but it's not panning off to the rest of the market. So they're trying to figure out where things are going and where the market should be heading, and it gets very convoluted. So the next article is going to explain that, but we are up against a break, so we're going to pause for a moment. Welcome back, everybody. So I got a little carried away with that last article. Again, more confusing than anything else. So let's take a step back from the confusion. So the Epic Times had what I thought was a good article talking about the 2%, 2.8% growth. And I say that for a reason. And so you had this announcement, the national output grew faster than expected, should have generated some relief in optimism. However, it didn't. So it was kind of shrugged off by Wall Street and Main Street, and the S&P and Nasdaq. And why didn't they react bigger? So this is really kind of digging into the details. It's because nobody trusts the federal numbers anymore. The jobs data has been revised downward pretty much every single month. They come up with the good news. Hey, look at this great news, and then it gets revised downward. The inflation data is revised every single quarter, and usually in the wrong direction. And even the GDP data has become a tool for political propaganda. So again, nobody trusts the numbers because they're being manipulated so much, which is really bad for the economy. And it's bad when we actually do get supposedly good news. Even then, when you look at the GDP, an increase from 1.4% to 2.8%, we're still seeing an increase, and I don't think that number is completely distorted. There's got to be some underlying growth there. But again, we're using different numbers. When you look at the CPI, that rose 2.8% over the period. Again, wildly underestimated because it leaves out the biggest causes for inflation, because inflation goes from one sector of the economy to another. Again, housing is higher than it's ever been right now. Insurance is taking a huge hit. The cost of debt, resident cost of debt, is very much as high as hitting, growing faster than ever. So these numbers, if we have 2.8% growth, but 2.8% inflation, we're still going backwards. Because the way they look at GDP is they look at total growth. The PCE, what the government is now using, which has an even lower number of 2.3, doesn't really. It's even a less accurate. It ignores all or most of the most volatile things. So again, ignores most of the inflation happening in the economy. They exclude real home prices, interest rates, health insurance, home insurance. Don't account for added fees or inflation, which is all happening in our current economy. If it's adjusted by an actual number, the growth would vanish. And that's why the market's reacting the way they are. They're like, let's move on. And it's been getting worse over the last 3 years. So, and it's not fair to say that only the Biden administration has done this. This has been done, all across the board. And I'd love to see some standards put in place, and that make it clear how people are doing it. I mean, one of the first things with was unemployment being distorted by just taking millions and millions of people and taking them out of the labor market. People aren't talking so much about unemployment because we're still doing the same game, but that started 10 plus years ago. So they're saying, look, it doesn't make sense if we're counting dollars and cents to measure economic growth, but we're not tracking how in that same measure, how dollar cents are losing value due to inflation, which has been at least 20%, probably in some areas 50% or more, depending on the sector, over the last 4 years. So they're trying to figure this out, and here's a nice little article or chart. And this is the last time we had federal debt over 120% of our GDP, or close to it, was World War II, 1946. It takes a time to put the brakes on everything. We did the Lend-Lease program. We lent all kinds of money to Europe. and then we took as a percentage of growth, it was cut down until the 70s, where it went up, and then through Reagan increased the national debt, and then it continued, went down in the later years, the Clinton era here, and then ever since it's eked back up and then exploded since 2010, and really going. So you had the 2008 crisis, and now you have your post-COVID, national spending higher than ever. And to be fair, one of the things the article talks about is that measuring economic numbers during a war is very unreliable, hard to accurately track. So again, part of it is just everything's distorted in war. You have rationing. You don't have economic prosperity typically in war because everything's being spent on things that are getting sent to war, destroyed. After the war, we held all this military surplus stuff. A lot of it just got dumped into the ocean. A lot of it got recycled, so a lot of economic productivity didn't really add to the value of the economy. It wasn't until after the war ended that, again, we paid down the national debt, and then that's when we had a lot of economic prosperity through the 50s and 60s. Moving on, and this is really, moving on to our topic of the day. It's important to sit back and say, okay, what is really happening in our economy? How can we look at and make wise decisions moving forward when the numbers are all distorted? So this is why it's important to track this information, to be aware that there are perverse incentives to distort the information or present half the economic picture. A lot of the news, the Associated Press is sitting there out trumpeting, hey, 2.8% growth, but when you compare that to inflation, it's actually bad news. When you look at real inflation, we're still losing ground in the economy, which is, again, frustrating and disheartening. So moving forward to our topic of the day, the ERC. So the Employee Retention Credit. This is something that can drastically help businesses because the possible credits are fairly large. We've talked about people getting, not only just 20, 30,000 for small companies, but hundreds of thousands if for larger companies as well. And this is basically a credit for keeping employees retained through COVID. And this is the whole part of it was to encourage people to keep people working through COVID, keep the businesses open, and to reward them for doing that. The problem is now people are getting the money 3 years later, 4 years, going since 2020, 4 years later, and it doesn't have. It was part of the government putting out all kinds of money and funds for it, but they got overwhelmed because they weren't prepared for the onslaught of claims. And so, unfortunately, it's not really helping. It's not having the immediate impact it was supposed to help, but the government put it out there. People are entitled to this credit, and they can still go back to 21 and file for this because right now any refunds from 2020 have expired. But again, that just happened in May. So a lot of people are still going back to 2021. There are still claims being filed, but the IRS has a mountain of claims that they're trying to work through. So, short history, September 14th, the IRS was overwhelmed with all these, and they issued a moratorium on processing of new ERC claims at least until 2024. That moratorium has continued until this summer. So about 6 weeks ago, they made an announcement that they're going to start processing these claims. But from September to really May, what was the IRS doing? They were taking and they were analyzing all this information. So they digitized a lot of these claims. They put them into a number cruncher and they said, okay, where are the risks? Where are the high risk things here? And so a lot of people have received it over the past 2 years, but again, this has really become such a big thing. It really has been overwhelming for them. So again, there are a lot of, if you want to dig into this, there's a lot of information about it. I'm not going to, again, it becomes a very long article. What I want to focus on is what is the IRS doing now about these claims? How are they approving them? And the IRS has been coming out with information. So let's take this. Again, remember, anything the IRS puts out is not dispositive, but it is good information to have. There are more warning signs here. So at the beginning of the year, they had a voluntary program where you could withdraw your claim. And if you already received the money, they were letting you keep up to 80% of the, oh no, keep 20% of what you already received, which was very generous. But they know a lot of this money has already been spent. If you apply for these voluntary programs, well, it ended in March, but they're talking about reopening it. That's in this article. You don't have to pay it back in one chunk. You can get on a payment plan. There are ways to deal with these balances if you've already received the money and you're concerned that you didn't qualify. So this article walks through it. It's not a short article, but that's why I've tried to reserve so much time for it and make sure that we can really go over what to be concerned about. If you haven't applied for the ERC yet, you still can, but most people have already applied for it. The IRS is urging businesses, first of all, to review their filings with the tax professional, and they put out 12 warning signs or other mistakes that they're seeing. It's just causing these to be rejected. So if you have any issues, talk to a trusted tax professional, and you can still withdraw your ERC claim even if you submitted it. Doesn't matter when you submit it. If they haven't processed it, you haven't gotten paid, you can still withdraw it. If you have been paid, and they're going to talk about this towards the end of the article, that you can, they're going to open up the voluntary withdrawal program again. They only had it open until March, and give people another opportunity to withdraw. I can't tell you if you should or not. Again, this is if you did qualify for it, you should get the credit. You're entitled to it. If not, be very careful about this, and this is why I'm talking about this, because this is the new area where the IRS is going to be auditing and coming after people, and a lot of people are going to owe a lot to the IRS and penalties for filing fraudulent returns. People are getting investigated over this. So again, they're working aggressively to pursue improper claims, but at the same time increase payments going out to businesses. This has been happening, but slowly. So again, the whole point of this is to point out common errors that compliance teams are seeing, so people can look at their situation and say, okay, do these apply to me? And rather than be hit with any penalties, they're trying to promote this so people will voluntarily withdraw their applications. So again, in June, they announced that they had digitized and analyzed about 1 million ERC claims, represent about 86 billion in claims. And then this is where they're coming up with the data, and they're scrutinizing hundreds of thousands of more claims with audits, and then they're beginning to additional processing of low-risk claims to get money out. And this is what they said they were going to do about 6 weeks ago. They've been starting to do it, but again, it's been still moving at a relative snail pace. But they ended the moratorium, and now they're starting to pay people out. So again, this is a huge project for the IRS. There's a lot of money coming into this to try to address this, and they are emphasizing, if you're not sure, talk to a trusted tax professional, talk to a CPA that knows and understands these rules. not as easy as you would think. So we're going to really dive into each one and kind of hash this out. So these are the looking at all the issues coming out from their analysis. There are 5 common signs to look out for. These aren't the only, but these are red flags that they're paying attention to and using to reject audits or reject applications and audit people over. So, essential businesses during the pandemic that could fully operate and didn't have a decline in gross receipts. So if your business was not directly hurt by the shutdowns, by government orders, if you didn't have a decline in gross receipts, you weren't hurt. I mean, the purpose of the ERC claim was to help businesses hurting as a result of the COVID orders and what happened with COVID. And if you didn't have a decline in gross receipts over this period, you're not going to qualify. Now, the interesting part is this is by quarter. So you could qualify for some quarters, and then if your business starts recovering, not qualify for other quarters. So again, that's a very tricky thing right there. So you have to, they're again encouraging everybody to review the eligibility rules and examples related to government orders. And this is where we get into the next thing. So if you cannot support how a government order fully or partially suspended business operations, again, this is fact driven. It depends on your specific situation, and they are demanding not only proof, but they want. Again, this is when people were applying for this. They didn't need that. They know that they needed to prove this up, that they needed to have facts. And when they're questioning businesses, many businesses haven't provided enough information to confirm eligibility, which means they're demanding a lot of proof. If you don't have it, it's very likely that you're going to get audited or have your claim denied. If it's just denied, that's one thing. But if you get audited and they come after you, that's where you can end up owing most of the money back with penalties and interest on top of it if you've already received the funds. So you have to have a good example. This is a government order that came out through COVID. This is how it affected my business directly. And it has to either fully or partially suspend the business operations. Family members' wages is a big thing. So they do not qualify. If you have family members working for you, wages paid to related individuals aren't qualified wages per the ERC. So if your spouse is working for you, child or descendant of a child, brother, sister, stepbrother, stepsister, father, mother, ancestor, or an ancestor of either. So this is pretty broad. Stepfather or stepmother. And this is probably because they're seeing people list all their family members and trying to get around rules like this. A niece or nephew, aunt or uncle, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, father-in-law, mother-in-law, brother-in-law. This is a pretty wide net here. Or other household member. So someone that lives in your household, works for you and was claimed as a eligible employee and you counted their wages in calculating the ERC. So if you have anybody connected to you, lives in your house, related to you, I mean, it looks they didn't list cousins. But again, if it's pretty broad net here, and someone that has the same principal place of abode, again, none of those wages count. So I would go through this, and again, for a lot of small businesses, a lot of them have family members, family-run businesses. So if that's your situation, you might want to consider withdrawing your ERC application. And we're up to, and then it gets down the break, so we will be back shortly. Welcome back, everybody. We're just focusing again on some of these issues here. I went a little bit over, so just want to cover real quick. If you have relatives working for you, and this is again going to hurt small businesses, pay attention to this list. If you have relatives that you paid wages to, and they spouse, child, or descendant of child, brother, sister, stepbrother, father, mother, or ancestor, stepfather, stepmother, niece, nephew, aunt, uncle, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, father-in-law, any in-laws, or household members, or people that you were that lived in your house, or at your residence. Those will all be disqualified. The wages paid to them do not count for the ERC per the plan. So again, if you used, that's a big thing here that's going to hurt a lot of small businesses. Businesses using wages already used for the PPP program. So if you use wages for the PPP program and got that loan forgiveness, the program ended all the way back in May 31st, 2021. But if you got those funds, you can still get that. If the SBA forgave the loan, you can't claim the ERC on those wages. So they don't want you to double dip here. So again, be mindful of this. If you did get if you did do the PPP loan and had it forgiven, that's more wages that won't qualify for the ERC. And then you have special rules for large employers with over 100 or 500 full-time employees. So again, you should be talking to an ERC specialist, and again, this if you do have a larger business, you should definitely be talking to a specialist, someone that knows and understands the ERC, and be very wary about claiming people that don't qualify for this. So again, some of the issues here, these are some of the issues that they're seeing, just not overall issues, but things leading to incorrect ERC claims. Too many quarters being claimed. So promoters have urge people to apply for all the quarters, trying to get as much as possible. And they're pointing out that, look, qualifying for all quarters is uncommon. Because you might qualify for some quarters if your income has gone down, but not others because then your income went back up. If you didn't see a decline in revenue, again, that's something that they're flagging as an incorrect claim. And you have to look over your eligibility for each quarter. So I mentioned that earlier. Again, this is an issue when you're looking at this. You should look by quarter. Did I qualify? Did I claim the right income? And so a lot of this, the information, and they keep mentioning promoters, people are pushing the ERC saying, look, apply for it. A lot of this information has been very unclear, and the government, they were figuring things as they went through. So people were figuring this out as they went. And so the question is, are you claiming the right one? And even though a government order was in place in the area, the way the IRS is looking at it, if your particular operations weren't affected, or if you chose to suspend business operations voluntarily, you don't qualify. So they're contesting that. They see this as your operations had to be affected, or if you voluntarily chose to close operations, they're going to say that you don't qualify. So you had to have a government order, must have been in effect, and, so this is an end test, both parts are required. The employer's operations must have been fully or partially suspended by the government order. So which government orders qualify? Again, you have to figure that out through the examples that they put out there. And they have to be fully or partially suspended by the government order. You weren't allowed to work because, again, if you're a beach company, the beaches were shut down. It had to be a government order that directly affected your business. And it must be due to the COVID-19 pandemic. If it wasn't specifically for COVID-19, you don't qualify. And this has to be a government order, not guidance or a recommendation or a statement. So even though a lot of recommendations or guidance were put out that affected business, if it wasn't a clear government order that you had to do this, it doesn't qualify. So again, they've really tightened this up. A lot of people were hurt by COVID, but if it wasn't a clear, direct government order that affected your business, and again, you have to look quarter by quarter whether or not this applied, or whether or not you qualified for each quarter. So some promoters suggested that if people qualify based on the communications from OSHA. So if you had guidance from OSHA, this is generally not true, not acceptable as a government order. So again, a lot of people are getting confused here. They know their business was hurt by COVID, but if you don't have a qualifying government order, your claim will most likely be denied. So again, go here for the examples. If we have time, we can kind of click on and go through that. But again, we'll just go there real quick. It kind of walks through the different examples of government orders. An order made from the city's mayor that they must close. State's emergency proclamation that residents must shelter in place. A local official imposing curfew on residents that impacted their operating hours. Local health department mandating a workplace closure. So if you have guidance from OSHA that doesn't qualify, you need to have an order from a government official, not just the federal government, that force the closure of your business. So that's the kind of qualified government orders that they're contemplating here, that they're allowing for the ERC, and you need proof. So one of the concerns here, going up, being unable to support how, you have to have proof and plenty of it to show that this is what the order was and this is how it directly impacted my business. So just saying it, you want to show through bank statements, you want to show through your P&L, you want to be very thorough in proving up this was the government order and this is how it happened. So if you don't have that proof together, I would get it together now, expecting that they're going to question it. So going back to where we were, government orders that don't qualify. Too many employees and wrong calculations. So again, going over the numbers and how these were calculated is absolutely going to be very crucial here. So be cautious about claiming ERC for all wages paid to every employee on their payroll. So throughout 2020 to 21, the law changed. So again, this is where you might qualify for some quarters and not others. There are dollar limits and varying credit amounts, and the employers need to meet certain rules for wages to be considered as qualifying wages. Again, you have to, this is more complicated than you would think, and I would recommend going over this with a tax professional, CPA, that considers himself as having an expertise in ERC. So, and again, this is by each tax period or quarter. So again, they want you to review all these calculations, avoid overclaiming the credit, which again is happening. And if you try to use the same credit across multiple tax periods or quarters for each employee that you have, that's another big red flag that they're saying. So again, they have a nice little chart here comparing 2020 versus 2021, and just what needed to happen in each quarter. So eligible employer, eligibility requirements. We don't have enough time to dive through all of this. I want to get through the end of this, but again, I'm going to post this link it came out in the news today on July 29th. So you can just go back to irs.gov and click on news. So you go and just click on news and go to January 29th. You should be able to find this article. But again, if you have applied for it, I would go through it, take this to a CPA, sit down, and someone that is familiar with the ERC, and go over this. Businesses citing supply chain issues. So they're not granting ERCs based on supply chain disruption. Did this affect businesses all throughout the economy? Absolutely. Was it caused by COVID? Absolutely. Is it a government order that affected someone's business? No. So if their employer needs to ensure that if their supplier had a government order that met the requirements, you can try to qualify for that. But just overall disruption in the economy does not qualify you for the ERC credit. So again, there's rules on supply chain issues, and again, an expanded legal memo on supply chain disruptions to go through and make sure that if you didn't have a direct order on yourself, but a supplier did, it has to qualify, it has to meet that same criteria as before. And again, dig into it, read into it. So again, claiming too much of a tax period or too much ERC for a tax period. And again, it said this, it's possible and uncommon that someone qualifies for the entire calendar quarter. So again, this if you claimed all quarters and claimed as much income as you could for each quarter, this is a huge red flag that they're looking at, and they're flagging this to try to say, look, we need to audit this. We need to dig into this more. Another big no, if you didn't pay wages or didn't exist during the eligibility period. This is kind of obvious. If you weren't in business, can't claim the credit, but again, people are flooding, there are fraudulent and suspect applications through there. Again, beware over this whole nothing to lose mentality. So not only do you have, if you got the ERC credit, you risk repayment requirements, penalties, interest, audit, and potential expenses of hiring someone to help resolve the incorrect claim, which again, we're expecting a huge flood once they start really moving on this. There's going to be a lot of people that are getting audited. There's a lot of people that are going to owe money, and this is going to hurt businesses in the long run. A lot of businesses. So if you're in that situation and you look at it and say, oh, maybe I didn't qualify for it, what are your options here? And the IRS is encouraging people. It makes it easier for them if they claim withdrawal, but you can amend their returns. You can amend your application. So claim withdrawal, if you I didn't qualify, I want to just pull back my entire claim, you can do that. And they will treat the taxpayer as though it was never filed. No interest and penalties will apply. This only works, though, if you haven't received any money. You can always go back and amend your returns, and that will correct the amount of your claim. So again, if you made some mistakes, you can go back, amend it, and still have your application valid. Lastly here, voluntary disclosure program. So they did this for a short period through, I don't remember when it started, but it went through, I believe, the end of March. And they're getting ready to reopen the voluntary disclosure program. So again, this will probably be for a brief period. So I would highly recommend, if you got the ERC, if this sounds complicated, it's because it is. There's so much that I try to cover. And there's so many other links. It's well, here's a link. Follow this if you need to dig into it more. If you have questions, call us. 520-485-7371. You can find us online at guardiantaxlaw.com. But what I would be sitting down and going over the particulars with your CPA. If you need a CPA that specializes in the ERC credits, give us a call. But this is going to be a huge area where a lot of people, a lot of businesses are going to struggle, are going to have to deal with a lot and tackling these issues. So again, protect your business, protect your family, and your livelihood moving forward. Get ahead of this. Do the research you need to address these ERC claims. And again, if you have any questions, it's always better to get good advice earlier or sooner rather than later. It's not exactly early at this time point, but again, it's all about your livelihood. It's about protecting your employees' livelihoods as well. And again, it kills me to see businesses step into bear traps and have to deal with hundreds of thousands of tax debt that they didn't have to deal with. So again, if you have questions, call, ask them. And again, these programs are designed to help businesses, and that's what they should be doing rather than hurt them. So hope you have a great Monday, great start to your week, and I hope this was informative. Again, I'm going to link everything on our website. You'll give me a YouTube link where you can go directly to these videos, and the links will be shared so you can access this article yourself directly, or any of the articles that we touch on every day. So stay informed and try to make complicated issues easier for you and your family, which is why the name of the show is Taxes Made Easy. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.